Shalom friends, this is Tom and Sarah Wylie. We call ourselves the Nomadic Homesteaders because although we started off homesteading in Idaho and Missouri of America, now we are traveling full-time as a family in all of Europe, currently coming to you from Wales. Our goal is spreading sustainability everywhere we go. I used to just be focused on handyman and homesteading skills, but now we're broadening to encompass a lot more about sustainability. So much of homesteading focuses on the skills of growing food and food security and like energy systems and developing support systems and community. There also needs to be a focus on the sort of generational aspects of sustainability, like family relationships. Obviously a family, if it's not reproducing itself, growing itself over time and doing that in a healthy, sustainable way, obviously it's not sustainable. And so we're focusing on those family aspects as well. Today, I thought we would start a conversation on kind of addressing the elephant in the room of, okay, if you guys are seeking sustainability, how does living nomadically fit within the model of sustainability? How on earth can you be sustainably nomadic? Because those are sort of opposing, they seem like sort of opposing terms. So we wanted to just start a conversation about that and answer some questions that people have had, friends and family members and others have asked about what we're doing, why we're doing it, how we're doing it. We have talked about the reason why we shifted to nomadic living. We've touched on it in the past. We'll talk about that more today. But the one of the primary reasons was we owned property in Missouri, in the Ozarks, and we were homesteading on that 10 acres, growing food, raising animals, practicing permaculture techniques and all that. But it felt very good, but it actually wasn't truly sustainable because we had debt that we were carrying from building up our first homesteading property in North Idaho, and we hadn't been able to pay that debt down significantly, and our income, the amount of income we were regularly producing wasn't enough to significantly actually get that debt paid off and done with. And it was coming to a point where it needed to be paid off and we needed to get free from it. And so though it felt good, it truly wasn't sustainable. And that's something to consider. If you are highly in debt to get in the position you're at and there's no foreseeable plan for actually getting out of that debt, you do need to take that into consideration that is, that there is vulnerability there, that if it ever comes to a point where that debt needs to be eliminated, you need a means to do that. And you need to keep that in consideration of your overall, sustainability model. So part of our move was selling our home there in Missouri to pay off that debt and to get us into a situation where we were still able to pay our living expenses, still able to explore the topics of sustainability and homesteading, permaculture, all of those things, to do it as a family, but to do it in a more mobile model and to do it also in a model of exploring Europe, which is something that God put on our hearts to do, and we've been excited to be doing now for a year, almost.
Yeah, and it was about a year ago now.
Yeah.
That we had our first intro video to you guys about us coming over here and moving here, and had kind of the same kind of a talking back and forth when we were first had moved to Portugal. But at that point in time, we were staying in an Airbnb.
Yep.
I had done a lot of research when we were looking at it, and Tom was busy selling stuff off and doing all the research in that, and I was looking ahead to what we were going to do when we moved, and I saw, we could totally live in Portugal or in different places. We can just rent there. It'll be great. And then we landed in Portugal and we realized that is not feasible, essentially.
Yeah.
Because to be able to rent in Portugal, one, it takes weeks to a month often, people said, to actually find a place and get it on lease, to sign up for that. And then most people there, in the culture there, they don't have short-term leases.
Yeah.
1 to 3 months, we found out, which we were not aware of at the time. And we thought we would at least be able to get 6 months or something. I mean, ultimately, we first were looking at actually moving and living in Portugal for at least several years and buying property and such, but found out that even just a few months isn't really feasible there and didn't work. And Airbnbs turned out to get really expensive. And we literally found almost the cheapest ones. We found the cheapest in some areas, and they were interesting.
Yeah.
So we were
cheapest
usually
ones generally didn't work very well. So
we were
have to
usually
go like
just above
1 or 2 notches
one
up
step above
to be a healthy place for us to be.
But those places all were pretty much, for the most part, they were almost all outside of cities or towns.
Yeah.
And because we have 5 people in our family, if we ever wanted to go into town to get groceries or to go shopping, or to go anywhere, you can't just call an Uber or a Bolt, because the ones in Portugal didn't have seating.
Well, they're pretty much all in the town, in cities.
Yeah.
They're not out in the rural countryside, which is where we were mainly staying, because that's where the cheaper Airbnbs were. And those were the areas we were wanting to explore for possibilities of homestead properties, that kind of thing.
They physically
so they
didn't
weren't
have
available. You couldn't call them. They were really expensive to come out to where you were and carry you anywhere. And they were a maximum of 5-seater vehicles, which means they could only take 4 of us because there's a driver. And so it literally was impossible. And so we had to rent a car, and that got expensive. The maximum size of car we could rent was also a 5-seater. And so bringing stuff with us always became a 2-trip deal, because we had luggage for 5 that we were actually living out of. And so so it was just very not sustainable. And a lot of this, we're basically sharing our experience. A lot of people have asked, a lot of Americans who are pursuing homesteading and more sustainable lifestyles, a lot of them have that question in the back of their minds of, is the U.S. truly the best place for us to be, or are there other options? Right now is a very interesting time politically, and with everything happening in the world with the new administration and just everything going on, there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's good things, but there's weird undertones, and so it's a very interesting time. and so a lot of people are honestly wondering, like, should I stay in the U.S. or are there other options? So we've explored that over the years. We've thought about it, but hadn't landed on a conclusive, yes, over here would be an amazing place to be in a specific country. We had heard about Portugal, and so that's where God put on our hearts to move ourselves to first, and then go from there. And so a lot of a big goal of what we've been doing is just exploring these different countries over here in Europe, and kind of being able to report back to our fellow Americans and folks from the UK as well on, this is what we found this country to be like. This is what the laws are like. This is what transportation is like. This is what housing is like. This is what the land is like as far as homesteading goes. This is what regulations are like. So that's we've been sort of low-key surveying these different countries as we've traveled through them to see what they're like and kind of report back to that, back on that. So we're going to talk in detail about Portugal, because we spent about 2.5 months there when we first arrived here in Europe, and got some pretty good, deep experience in living there rurally and on homesteading property. We actually camped with a homesteading family for a month, and experienced and learned a lot of things. And so we are going to do a dedicated video on that coming up here in the future. But today we want to just keep it more general. And I think maybe a good place to shift to now would be just the nomadic model, because we have been, or how we've been making that sustainable, and how that enables us to be more sustainable, basically. You talked about how we were trying to rent, discovered that it's not really an option to rent short term, at least in Portugal and a lot of other countries. Basically, short-term rentals are difficult. There's a lot of paperwork involved, a lot of lead time involved, and if you don't know for sure that you're going to be in that place for a long time, it's a big commitment to make, and a big financial commitment to make, and have to back up with paperwork proof and all that stuff, for a place that you don't know if you're going to be there for sure long term. And so Airbnbs got super expensive, super fast, and so we basically came to the conclusion that if we could own our home, but have it be mobile, so we could take our home wherever we go
Nomadic.
with us,
Be nomadic.
then it's much more affordable, because you're at least not having to pay for that, that home structure. Yes, you have to find a place to park it, which is a real cost, depending, and it can be more or less depending on how you do it. But that's how it has worked for the 5 of us to have repeatable beds that we don't have to pack up and reset up every place we go.
Well, that's a big issue too.
Yeah.
Is it wasn't sustainable moving this way when you have a family, even if it's just 2 of you. Realistically, moving and packing all the time, because we were moving every couple of weeks, because we could only get an Airbnb for a few weeks because we didn't know what the Airbnb was like.
Yes.
And some of them were really
you have
rough.
to pay ahead of time.
But you also had to deal with mold in some of the houses.
Yep.
And so we learned we didn't want to be too far out. But then when you only get a place for a couple of weeks, even if you want to stay there longer, often by that time it was getting closer to the summer. And so those places were booked. So you have to think about those things that we hadn't quite figured out.
Prices go up in the busy season.
Yep. But the main thing was just moving. So we moved every 2. That was what my point was getting at was.
Yeah.
So I only had it booked for 1 or 2 weeks at different places, and so we ended up moving quite frequently, and so it got really the wear and tear on us and on our children. It was getting pretty rough, and so having a place that we realized in a caravan has worked out. To have a place where the children all have their own beds. We have our bed. We all have our own space, so we can put stuff where it is, and it stays there. And we know when we stop at night, or if we're there for a month or 2, we know where everything is. Yeah. We know that it's our own cooking stuff. We don't know what kind of cooking stuff we're going to be at. We know if it works or not. We can change things if we want to. So it works out being nomadic, unless you find like the exact spot you want to be in and then build. But until that point, it actually works really well. We found out to be in a caravan and to have a van, because especially with a family, but even not, motorhomes are a lot more expensive. And I'm sure many of you know, anyone who's looking into it, motorhomes are a lot more expensive. But the main thing is to be able to camp, and especially with us loving being in the countryside, to be able to, if we had to pack up a motorhome every time that we wanted to go to town to buy groceries, or go do anything, that's not feasible. Like that's not self-sustaining, because then you'd have to pack everything up, and it doesn't make sense. Yeah,
real quick, if you haven't lived in a caravan, camper trailer, or motorhome before, realize that whenever you park somewhere to sleep, you need to level up the vehicle and get it stable, usually with stabilizing jacks on each corner. So you're dropping jacks, getting it level, hooking up to power, hooking up to water, or refilling water tanks. You are needing to deal with however your black water system works for your toilet. And so there's just a lot of details like we have a Starlink for internet, so that needs to get set up. So there's just plus when you're traveling, you kind of batten down the hatches sort of inside your vehicle, so that the loose stuff on the countertop isn't flying all over the place and crashing on the floor, and you don't have stuff needs to be secure. And so,
but doing all
like
of
you were
that,
saying, if you're living in a motorhome, you can't just up and drive to town for a one trip of groceries, because you're tearing down all of your stuff.
So having a touring caravan,
Yeah.
it is just pulled behind your vehicle. And so we can drop that off,
Yeah.
and then we can drive in the vehicle. Tom has his office in the van, and so it gives him a separate area to do that, which if we had a motorhome, it just wouldn't work for us.
And if you're unfamiliar, in America, a trailer, a bumper pull camper trailer, is the equivalent of what in Europe they call a caravan.
Or a touring caravan.
And in the UK, they call it a touring caravan. In the UK, what they call a caravan can mean this, what we're in, which is a bumper pull touring caravan camper trailer. But if you just say the word caravan, it can mean anything from that up to the American equivalent or title of mobile home, like a single wide, double wide mobile home. That is called a static caravan in the UK. But if you just use the word caravan, it can kind of go either direction. And people always ask clarifying questions, like, what exactly do you have? So right now we're living in a touring caravan that is being pulled by a passenger van. It's a Mercedes Sprinter van. So that is working really well for us. It's a small space, which we have adjusted to. Still small though. We would like to have what they would call an awning or a tent that attaches to the side of the caravan. We would like to get one of those soon-ish, but right now it's working. We would love to be able to park on friends' properties and be able to plug into electric and reimburse them for that. And we would just need to currently, the way our toilet is, it's a cassette toilet, a chemical toilet, little portable tank that comes in and out and is just handheld with little wheels on it. And so that needs to be dumped roughly every day. And then we just needed the ability to refill our freshwater tank with clean water. And that's pretty much our basic needs as far as utilities go. And so we would love to be able to do that, but it's the whole thing of meeting new friends that have property and a place where you could park that works for that, and that are up for it, and that relationships work to do that. And so what we have been doing thus far is campsites, basically campgrounds. And so that has been a process of figuring out how to find those and how to find the price point where it's affordable, it's as cheap as possible, but it has enough of the amenities and utilities that we need to be able to use at our current stage of development of things.
And we found out, for anyone who is interested in doing this type of a thing, especially over here in Europe, they have, at least here in the UK, they have what is called seasonal pitches. So you basically can pay and you can come and go from places. And we've learned that certain ones you're only supposed to be there for a month. Other ones, it kind of depends on what country you're in. But that type of a thing can be a lot more self-sustainable and cheaper by quite a bit.
Yes,
like
hugely. Yeah.
As in the cost that you give for a home that doesn't have a mortgage, but that you're paying property tax on. It's about the same. It is.
Yeah. Thus far in Europe, just for round ballpark estimate figures on what you could expect, what we have found kind of in, throughout Europe, I'm just going to go with euros as the currency. The cheapest, there are some places that are free, but that's basically you're just parking for the night. There's no utilities. There might be a place to dump your black water tank, but that's going to be, you're going to have to pay a little bit for that usually. And so if you need just a place to simply park and spend a night, you can find them for free. Quite a few places. Some countries allow wild camping, which is just you showing up somewhere and parking for the night. Some countries don't, so you have to be aware of that. But in general, like the cheapest place where you could park and get basic hookups of electric and the ability to refill water and dump a toilet tank, probably minimum 20 euros-ish, somewhere mostly around in there. And on up to, if you're at nicer, more established, larger camping sites, can often easily be in the 50 to 60 euros per night.
Here in England, especially.
And so that, especially in the UK.
And in Germany.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
The bigger, nicer places can easily be that expensive. And so that adds up, even though it's cheaper than an Airbnb or whatnot, it still adds up really fast. But seasonal pitches, we have found, so like transitioning to the British pound right now, seasonal pitches, kind of the low end of what we've found, has been in the neighborhood of 2,000 to 3,000 pounds for
almost a year,
6 to 7 months, or in the 3,000 to 4,000 range for 12 months worth. You have to check details on whether you're allowed to be there full time or whether you're allowed to be there 11 out of 12 months or whatnot, because there are different kind of levels of residency permits that the camping sites can be paying for. But that's some rough ballpark figures of what we found thus far. So let's talk about visas for a second, because that's part of living nomadically, is having the permission to be in the country you're in. As American passport holders, we can be in the area, it's called the Schengen area, which is basically most of Europe, minus the Balkans. I don't know which direction you're seeing. Minus the Balkans to the east, the UK to the north, and then there's Morocco that's kind of in the south, right across the strait from Portugal, Spain. That's in northern Africa. And those are kind of some common, that's sort of the triangle that we haven't made it to Morocco yet. We'd like to explore it and see, but that's kind of the triangle that we have figured out of. These are options for us to be out of the Schengen area, but then we can be in that inner Schengen area as just tourist. On tourist visas, we can be in that Schengen area for 90 days out of the past rolling 180 days. And then you need, to spend the other time out of that area. In the UK, we are allowed to be in the UK for 6 months at a time. There's not a hard thing of, it's not like 6 months out of 12. It's just 6 months at a time with something of a break before your next period of 6 months. But they do kind of keep tabs on how frequently you're doing that, how much of a break you're taking from being in the UK, and from what we can tell, they're basically looking for, a pattern of, so are you trying to live here permanently now without a visa? So it's vague, but it's in general 6 months at a time with a break. We're aiming at least having 3 or 4 months in between, up to 6 month long stays. In terms of how you can sustainably have this kind of lifestyle, nomadic lifestyle, a very common model is the digital nomad model. If you have you have either passive income that you have built up from a business, or if you have a YouTube channel like we're growing, then basically that, or even remote work, where you can work from anywhere on a laptop with an internet connection, then you can move around and make things work. So how we personally have been affording doing what we're doing thus far is several fold. One of them being we sold our home in the US, and that gave us some income for a while, just from the proceeds of that sale. The majority of that went into paying off our debt and buying the caravan and van. And then we had some left over that we were living off as well. We're at the end of that now, as of a couple months ago. And then our next highest income at this time is our seed company called Heirlooms Evermore Seed Co. And that is it's based in North Idaho, run by our friend Mary Lee, who is in the process of buying the company from us over the coming few years. And so that is the largest piece of our income. It's not enough to fully sustain us every month to month, but it's the biggest chunk. And then we're building up the YouTube channel to be more of a supplement. And then other than that, I have I'm selling DIY plans for an off-grid log splitter that I developed called the Paul Bunyan Wood Chopper. You can check out those plans at paulbunyanwoodchopper.com. I also have a book that I originally published in 2014 called More Than Pie Crumbs, the picture book of priorities for parents. That is currently an ebook at this time that you can get at tomwiley.org/more than pie crumbs with a hyphen between those later words. And you can get the digital book right now and read it. You also will be notified as soon as we get the book in print, because my oldest daughter and I are working on reformatting it to be able to be in print in a hard copy, full color book. So you'll be on the list to be notified first in line ordering the printed book, plus get an early bird discount on it. And then also you get Family Friday emails, which is an email I send out every Friday morning just helping you implement the things that you learned in the book. So those are go ahead.
So those are the things that we've been doing.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we learned just in talking and researching with other people who have lived a more nomadic lifestyle like this, because there actually are quite a few. There's a lot more people than what most people realize. There are people who are doing the digital nomadic, like Tom talked about with the visa, but there are also people who are traveling to places on tourist visas, like what we're doing, who teach English as a second language.
Yep.
And they'll spend 3 months in this country and then 3 months in that country, and they literally travel around doing that.
Yeah.
Because if you think about what you need to live on and the amount of money that you need to live on, as long as you can make that much income coming in, then it doesn't matter whether you live in America, if you're an American, or in the UK, if you're British, or whatever country that you're from. You just have to make that amount and have that coming in. And so one of the things that we had learned from some people who had gone to Portugal on YouTube is they talked about having multiple streams of income, because if one of them doesn't work or ends, then you have something else to go on. Because for us, we were planning on you mainly living off of the seed company, but that ended up drying up during the fall time, where people don't buy as many seeds. It's a seasonal in nature company. And so we ended up having our backup plan was the money left over from our house, which is what we did. And so now we're looking at other things to supplement the seed company. But we talked to somebody who, her family, oh goodness, it was years ago, like 20 years ago or 30 years ago, and her parents decided they were going to leave the U.S. and travel to Europe. And so they came over, and she said that they lasted, because of the visas, they traveled Europe some, and then they made it to the UK, and they ran out of money. And they had no other backups. They had no other forms of income. And so they ended up just leaving and going back to the U.S. So she said she had fun, but it was just kind of like a weird thing for her. And so that was one of the stories we heard. We also heard another story of someone who is currently living in the Balkans, and they started off in America, and they were going to try and get a visa, a hereditary or ancestral visa from her grandparents. That didn't work out in the country in Europe that they were going to go to. So they ended up in the Balkans, and she's teaching right now English as a second language. The amount of money that they're making is just enough to get by, but it is not what most Europeans or Americans, a lot of them are used to, Western Europeans and Americans are used to. And so those are possibilities. So if you can think and have an entrepreneurial mindset, if you're wanting to travel, so that if one stream doesn't come in, if you can start another one or have other ideas going, that's a really good way of doing it. Other people also have, instead of selling a house like what we did and living off the proceeds, they will rent their house and then they'll travel. There are a lot of people that we know that are doing world schooling. World schooling is basically traveling around the world. You can go for a short amount of time or a long time, and you just travel around and your kids learn about the world firsthand and get to have lots of different experiences. And so a lot of those people, they rent their place back home. And you're surprised by how many countries in the world that you can live on from rent of one house or two houses. And so you can have that as income also. So there are various ways that people can do this sustainably and can actually do it.
In most countries have rules against you making income in that country, like local income, as an employee. In some of the countries, you can start your own business. You can even hire employees, but you are not allowed to come in and replace local employees. And so you basically, for applying for visas, you need to be able to be self-sustaining and prove that your income is you're not going to be drawing on the kind of the state welfare system, essentially, or the equivalent of that.
All the countries we've looked at have
You're not going to come in and just start drawing from that country's resources for your survival. You need to have income. Another possibility too that can be very affordable, if you're up for it, is something called woofing, and it's sort of like a work in exchange for room and board kind of a model. And so we've looked into that quite a lot. We have almost pursued it a few times, but just circumstance-wise, timing-wise, it hasn't worked out yet, but we're very interested in checking it out, trying it out. And it's basically it's kind of the options are all over the map. At minimum, it can be raw property that somebody is trying to develop into something of a homestead or a farm.
Organic farming.
Often it's organic, and so that's a lot of our attraction to it is usually the people in that world, the woofing world, are trying to do it with permaculture or organic practices, and that's up our alley. And so you help them on their property in exchange for room and board. That room and board could be literally a place to pitch your own tent, or it could be a caravan or a static caravan that they have parked there, or an old bus or something that they parked there as living quarters, or it could be a room in their house, or it could be a little cottage or something of a building that you can live in. So that is worth exploring, and seeing if you find something that would work.
The reason why we haven't done that yet is because with that, it is often you have to do so many hours a day of work in exchange, which is great. But with trying to build up the YouTube and trying to build up various different businesses, Tom needs to put time and effort into that. And so doing that as well as working 4 or 6 hours is doable. But living in the caravan, there's a lot more life chores that are involved. And so for us, we haven't yet found also a family that works, because lots of different people with different worldviews and world points.
And we're also a family of 5, and so like it would be very easy to do as a single person or as a young couple. It'd be very easy to jump into that woofing thing, and you would have more the freedom of just trying something out and seeing how it works out, and then being able to up and move somewhere else if it didn't work out or whatnot. For us, having our own caravan was that was one of the reasons we decided to get a caravan versus continuing to try to just rent homes or whatever, was that we could show up to somebody's property and have our own little, self-contained living quarters.
For all 5 of us.
For all 5 of us. And all we would need would be, the ability to get some electricity and some water, basically. But if things didn't work out, or if we decided that we wanted to move on, the process of moving somewhere else would be, relatively simple and quick and as painless as possible. And so things to consider, if you're staying on somebody else's property, it's a relationship. You're building trust. You're also trusting them. You are, it's a relationship, thing that you're establishing. So if you're going to do that, I would recommend contacting them first, having a video chat or something, introducing yourselves and each other. And so you can get to know each other a little bit, make sure you're coming from similar, places, and clearly lay out your expectations of each other, and get that in writing. And then also try it short term first, a week, 2 weeks, if they're up for doing something like that, maybe a month max. I wouldn't recommend doing any more than that until you have known them and actually tried it out for a while and see if this is going to work. Relationships can sour, things can go wrong, misunderstandings happen, life situations can also change, health situations can change, and so things can come in and kind of interrupt what you thought was the agreement or what you thought was the expectation. Things can change, and so it can end up you needing to cut the plans short or change them. So just keep that in mind if you're going to pursue that. Other pieces of how we are living sustainably now, or how we're endeavoring to, just comes to groceries and what we're eating. It has been really interesting because in the United States, we were very aware of and concerned about what we were feeding ourselves and our children. And frankly, that was getting harder and harder to do because prices were increasing, and there is so much in store-bought, especially pre-prepared food. There is so much that is harmful for you, honestly, and so many preservatives and all kinds of things in food that you have to really keep an eye out for. And so that's why we were pursuing more and more trying to grow our own food and or source it from places where we knew how it was being raised or grown. But it has been interesting in our experience of moving over to Europe, because we're moving around. Obviously, we're not able to grow our own food. We would love to have the model of being more based in a particular few locations and bounce between them, because then you could do stuff like seasonal gardening and or raising a batch of meat chickens, or having egg layers that somebody else looks after when you're gone. There would be a lot of options, or at least knowing, the farmer that you always buy your beef from, or your lambs from, or whatever, or your lamb from. But for us, we have found that simply buying food at the grocery store in Europe, in general, is already healthier than what was available to us shopping in America, especially in rural parts of the country where Walmart was your only option.
Yeah. They don't have GMOs.
Yep.
They're not allowed over here. As many of you know, they also don't allow food dye. So that's it. Like just those two. Pesticides. Yeah, just using far less pesticides are allowed in general. So just those things, that in and of itself, the food, even just the basic food that you find, has to kind of fall into those lines. Yeah. We also found in Portugal, you can go shopping at the grocery stores and they're significantly cheaper than American Walmart, even there. But then we found out that if you can go to markets, it truly is a lot cheaper. Like in the Philippines growing up, they're a lot cheaper. What you would call farmers markets in America. Yeah. So going to those places and buying food was amazing. Yep. I'm really looking forward to that again. Yep. But finding out bakeries also. We found bakeries down in both in Actually, everywhere in Europe that
Portugal,
we've gone to. Not up here so much.
Albania.
Yeah. And other British people have said that they miss that on the continent. Having bakeries that you can go to and getting fresh baked bread.
Yeah.
And so finding those places can also help sustainability, but also just being able to eat healthy food for a family. Because that's a big reason, like you were saying, why people, especially in America and the UK, are really wanting to do their own gardening and such. A big push of that and a big drive is to have healthier food for your family.
Yeah.
So at the moment when we can't do that as much, we can at least still try and find healthier foods here.
Yeah.
To do that.
And it's honestly just more, it's just simply by being here, it is easier and cheaper for us to eat healthy.
Yeah.
Just simply buying food at the store.
Yeah. And a friend talked about, when I was talking with her about being sad of giving up our animals and garden and all of that aspect of self-sustainability, she brought up the fact that we could figure out how to do foraging here in Europe.
Yep.
And it is different because we don't know exactly all the places we can go. With laws of, in America, you can just go to the national forests if you needed to and pick stuff. Here it's not. I haven't exactly found out all the rules with that. I don't think it's quite the same. Yep. So we haven't done that as much. But on one of the camping spots we were at in Croatia, the kids and I were sick before we came up here to the UK the first time. And they had a bunch of pine trees on the campsite we were at. And so we got some of the needles that we knew what kind of pine trees they were.
Yep.
So they were safe. So we got some of the noodles and made pine tree tea. And that really helped with the cough. Remember that?
Yeah.
So like being
obviously
able to
we
do
weren't
that.
stripping the trees bare, and we were being careful and responsible and all that. But
yeah. So finding those things also and growing that skill is a huge part of it. We also want to start making our own deodorant again.
Yep.
We ran out of that a couple months ago.
Yep.
And it's been very frustrating.
I found some recently.
Of our deodorant?
Yeah.
Oh,
a little bit.
Oh, okay. That's
but
good.
we need to make more.
We need to make more because we found a really good recipe, which if you guys want to hear about, we can share with you. Really good recipe for deodorant. And we pour it into an actual deodorant container.
Yeah.
And so it's really nice. So being able to do that, having all of our supplies that we can make. We make our own tooth powder. So things like that is so part of the self-sustaining things.
I think the rain's starting. Let's pause. Well, I think we'll wrap it up for today's conversation. Check out the links below in the video description for our garden seeds, the parenting book, the DIY off-grid log splitter plans, as well as there's a free homesteading property guide masterclass video that you can download and watch. So check that stuff out. Make sure you subscribe to this channel so you can get our future videos. We're endeavoring to post something every day for 30 days. So we're a couple days into that now and enjoying it. We hope to settle into more of a like weekly, bi-weekly rhythm after that, but we really want to hit it for 30 days and put out a lot of regular content for you. So keep an eye out for tomorrow's video. Check out our previous videos here. And this is a playlist of our time so far in Europe as homesteading nomads. Thanks. See you later.